Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're joining from. Today we have Andy Leonard, who is doing his second webinar for DataPlatformGeeks, and this time it's on how to use SSIS Catalog. Before we start the webinar, I would like to quickly talk about a few things about the DataPlatformGeeks. DataPlatformGeeks is a community initiative of eDomino Systems, which has companies like SQLMaestros Special Events and Expand ERP. Please do explore their sites because they do a lot of training in terms of data platform as well as other technologies. Data Platform Summit is announced. I'm pretty sure everyone is aware about the conference now. This is the fourth year of the conference happening in August from 9th to 11th. And there are two PreCon training days on 7th and 8th. I'll be briefly covering what PreCon sessions are available at the end of this session. But about the 3-day conference, it's a 3-day pure learning event. There is no marketing or at this event. So it is your best chance to talk to experts from all around the world, like the Microsoft product team members, MCMs, MVPs, and industry experts. There are more than 100 sessions. 95 sessions are already announced. And you can go and see what technologies we are covering. We are covering more than 108 topics that are related to data platform in these 95 sessions that are already announced. It'll be interesting to see those topics, and this is the very rich technical content that is available at this conference. There are 57 speakers to this date, and there are more speakers joining on board. So it will be very interesting to see these sessions, and it will be your only chance to interact with these experts and learn from the experts. So this is the team, the core team behind DataPlatformGeeks, and the eDomino teams who help us run these events, like the webinars as well as the in-person events and the conference itself. Special thanks to Microsoft, who has been a great support in helping us building the DataPlatformGeeks community. If you are already part of DataPlatformGeeks, as you may be because you are attending the webinar today, so you would have registered on dataplatformgeeks.com. But if you haven't got the time to explore, please do take out some time and explore this site, because there's a lot of content available in terms of blogs, videos, and hands-on labs as well. So it'll be very beneficial, and also a lot of rich content available on this site for you to learn. Also join the Facebook group and the LinkedIn group. You can post your questions, as well as you can answer some questions that are already posted there. Now I'll quickly hand over to Andy. Andy, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. This is Andy Leonard, and I thank you for taking time out of your morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. And very honored to be here, very honored to be part of this awesome community, SQL Server Platform Geeks. Today, we're going to be talking about an introduction to the SSIS Catalog, and just a little bit about me. I'm Chief Data Engineer at Enterprise Data and Analytics. I work with SSIS and BIML. I do consulting and training. I've written pieces of 12 books, and I blog at andyleonard.blog. I created something called the Data Integration Lifecycle Management Suite. You can find that at dilmsuite.com. I'm a husband, a dad, a grandfather. Very honored to be part of the BIML Hero program, and I'm co-host of the Data Driven podcast. You can find that at datadriven.tv. So why are we here talking about this particular topic today? Well, there's a chapter in a book that's about 3 years old. It's called Unicorns Among Us, written by Lars Nielsen. And in chapter 3 on data wrangling, he says there's pure drudge work that can take 50 to 80% of a data scientist's time. And what he's talking about there is data engineering, data integration, data wrangling, munging. There's lots of names for it. But what can we do if we can shorten this long pole in the tent? Is we can literally change the world. And this is a quote from 2012. It's dated. It's about 6 years old. But this is from the campaign that helped re-elect President Obama in the United States. They used data science, and they simulated the election 66,000 times every night. Now, they didn't do that by rerunning the exact same data sets with the same weights and measures. They changed things and made tweaks, but that's a healthy number of executions each night. But that's one of the reasons why President Obama was reelected in 2012. So what can we do to shorten this cycle, this 50 to 80? I would venture 50 to 90% of the work, which is data integration, data engineering. Well, there's three ways we can do this. We can build data integration faster. We can make data integration execution more manageable, and then we can build faster data integration. And this presentation focuses on making data integration execution more manageable. So without further ado, I'm going to pop right over to the demo. And what I have here is an instance of SQL Server 2017. And I'm just going to zoom in here so we can see there's an Integration Services Catalogs node here in SQL Server Management Studio, or SSMS. Note there's no catalog configured. I can configure one by right-clicking or clicking Create Catalog. To use the SSIS Catalog, you have to enable CLR integration. Why? Because all of the objects that the catalog uses under the hood are actually .NET Framework objects. I'm going to recommend you check the Enable Automatic Execution of the Integration Services Stored Procedure at SQL Server Startup. If something unfortunate happens and SQL Server stops, SSIS will stop. And when SQL Server restarts, this job will fire and it'll go look for anything in the log that showed a status that was running, and it'll mark it as ended abnormally. You next need to supply a super secret password. And I'm going to put this one in here. And then once you do that, you can click OK. When you click OK, it actually restores a backup of the SSIS DB database. So if we look in here in this list of databases, we do see the SSIS DB database. And I tell people all the time, it's just a database. Now, granted, there's a lot going on here with the integration with the .NET Framework, but it's still just a regular old database with tables, views, and all of the objects you're used to seeing in a SQL Server database. This particular catalog is empty, but we can deploy to that. I've got a framework project here that we can just pop open, and I'll just right-click on one of my projects here and click Deploy, one of my test projects. When I do that, the Integration Services Deployment Wizard opens, and there's an introductory page which you can decide to skip. I don't skip it because I share it with everyone. I'm getting a warning here that tells me, hey, you created this on another machine, or another user created it. And that's an unfortunate side effect of encryption using the user key. The old way, we used to think about this, one way to avoid that message and similar messages, and the option that we could use is for protection levels, we could change that to don't save sensitive. I won't dig into that too much, but I will say I've not yet found a way to use that setting and execute SSIS packages in the debugger. So that said, note that I have to connect to my Integration Services Catalog. I have some options here on authentication. The only one that's going to work for me when I'm connecting locally, as I am right now, is Windows Authentication. So why then do I have these others? Well, these are here because SSIS is now available in the cloud. It's part of the Azure Data Factory Integration Runtime. That's what it's called, in fact. And so if we click Connect here, we'll connect locally, and it tells me, hey, you just created that catalog. There are no folders in there. There's no folder named Test found on that. That's easy to remedy. We can click the Browse button and then click the New Folder button and add a test folder. When we click OK, it creates a folder and selects it for us. We click OK again, our error is gone. We can continue walking through the wizard here. And the next step of the wizard varies. Some of you may see a validation screen prior to this review screen. Why would you see a validation? If you're running the version of the Integration Services Deployment Wizard that deploys to the cloud, you will see a validation step here where it'll check the packages and give you warnings about things that you probably need to address before execution in the cloud. Sometimes you'll see it when you deploy directly from an ISPAC file locally, but you will see this prior to, and it'll just tell you that it was skipped. The validation was skipped because you're deploying locally. One interesting thing about this review pane is there's a command line here. You can actually run isdeploymentwizard.exe from the command line. It's buried down in the Microsoft SQL Server DTS bin folder. And if you just copy this command line and paste it, take out command line and paste the path to IS Deployment Wizard, it'll actually run this. And it's an interesting way to run things from the command line. So just be aware of that. When I click deploy, it runs through the deployment wizard. Note this third step, changing the protection level. This is one of the reasons why don't save sensitive doesn't work when we're running in debug mode. It's not one of the reasons why, but it's related to that. When we deploy to the catalog, it changes the protection level, whatever we've got it set to. Even if we've got it set to encrypt all with password, it changes it to the equivalent of server storage. And I've got a blog post about this. If you think you're protecting your IP by setting the protection level on the package and the project to encrypt all with password, and then you deploy it to the SSIS catalog, that protection level is being changed. And anyone with the SSIS admin role membership can export that project to an ISPAC file, and it's very easy to open that package and see all of your IP right there in plain text. It does not remember the old protection level. So once we click close and we go back to our catalog, we can refresh this and we'll see that now we have a test folder. And if we expand a test folder, there's two virtual folders in here, projects and environments. If we expand projects, there's our framework test 1. There are no environments. We haven't configured one yet. And then there's another virtual folder that holds packages, and there's these 3 packages that are part of this SSIS project. If we want to execute them inside of the SSIS catalog, we can right-click and click Execute. We'll get the Execute package window that'll show up here. We don't have any parameters. We don't have any connection managers. This is a very simple package. And if we click OK, we'll get a message box that says the operation ID is number 2. For information about package executions and validations, open the Integration Services Dashboard report from the SSIS DB node. It gives us some more information there, but it prompts us, would you like to open the overview report now? Sure. And these reports are built right into SQL Server Management Studio. And I think that's good and bad. It's nice that they're here because they're really nice looking reports. They're well done. The good thing is that they're here. The bad thing is that they're kind of trapped in here. So one of the very first things I built as part of the Data Integration Lifecycle Management Suite, DILMSuite.com, is a solution, an SSRS, SQL Server Reporting Services solution, that reproduced a lot of the information and a lot of the look and feel for these reports. And you can get that for free. Not only is it free, it's open source. It'll pop you over to GitHub and you can download it and deploy this to either reporting services. There's also a project out there that works for SharePoint. But this gives us that operation ID of 2. It tells us the path to this package. Note that it's the folder project package. That's the path that we have here. There are actually 4 tiers in the SSIS catalog. The very top tier is the catalog itself. It's always named SSIS DB at the time of this recording. One thing to point out, we slide over here and take a look at these nodes. Note that the node itself, the parent node, is plural, Integration Services Catalogs. I think they actually considered making it so you could create multiple catalogs. They changed this so that you can only create 1 catalog per instance of SQL Server. Keep in mind, you can deploy multiple instances of SQL Server to a virtual or physical server. And there's the SSIS DB node, which is the catalog node. This is hard-coded and named SSIS DB, but that's the top tier catalog, then the folder, then the project, then the packages. So those are the 4 levels to the catalog from a package perspective. This one succeeded. That's a good thing. The machine is vDemo. That's the name of this virtual machine running in Hyper-V. It took just under 10 seconds to execute. Here's the start and end time, and there's the caller. The execution overview here is pretty nice. It kind of walks through the execution paths, tells us what happened, and we can actually click on these and see more information if there's more to be seen. I absolutely love this parameters used box, and we'll deploy another project here in just a minute, and you will see some parameters being used. But there's these three dump execution parameters, and the execution parameters are all capitalized. Then there's these other three, caller info, which could have been populated with me. That's my name, the demo A. Ray Leonard. Now you know my middle name. Logging level is an enumeration, and one means basic. And then synchronized is a bit, and it can either be set to true or false. By default, it's false. So interesting stuff here. Property overrides, we didn't see any of those, and that's a little beyond what we're going to talk about in this presentation. But there's a lot of information here. We can also take a look at the messages that were generated, and we raised some specific messages in a script task. We had one message that we generated, and there it is, the script task information message that says I am, and then whatever the name of the package is. Child 2 is similar, but child 2 will fail. It's hard-coded to not succeed, but to fail. The script task returns a failure result, but lots of information in here about what's going on, the information. There's a warning here that the script task is a SQL Server Integration Services 2012 version of a script task, and that's a fair warning, but note that the package runs anyway due to backwards compatibility. So quite a bit of good information here in the catalog. Let's play around a little bit with those parameters, and to do that, we need to drop something out here that has parameters. I've got this other project that I did from another webinar not long ago on lifting and shifting SSIS to the cloud, and in this particular project has some parameters that we can play around with. By the way, if you have any questions, you can drop them in the Q&A window, and I'll do my best to answer them as we go along. I know we'll have questions at the end of the day here as well. So again, I'm going to deploy this locally. I'm going to connect to my local instance. I'm going to connect to the other instance. That's right. I was looking for that error. I was like, why didn't that fail? It's because I sent it to a different instance. I have several instances on this virtual machine on vDemo. So again, we'll walk through this and do a really quick demo project here. This is configured to actually reach out to the cloud and pull some data down from there. So we have some parameters here. There's a package parameters, very generic. We have a connection manager for our source here, and if we double click this and open it up, we'll see that this is going to try and connect to the cloud. And it's trying to connect to my my server named SV Andy Demo out there on Windows Azure. But we deployed this locally. So the question is, will this work? Well, let's give it a shot and see. We'll refresh the catalog again. There's our demo. Here's our projects. Here's our environments. And we'll try this one package that we have out here. It's called Customer. Look at our connection managers, and we'll see that it's aimed at our initial catalog here, our SSIS DB, but our source and stage, our source is aimed at the catalog. I'm sorry, at an instance in the cloud in ADF, and stage is aimed here locally at a database called AdventureWorks LT Stage. So my guess is that this will fail, but let's take a look. And this time I'm going to answer no to this question. I'm going to go back to the SSIS DB node, right-click, and click on Reports, and go to Standard Reports. There's the Integration Services Dashboard, which has access to these other reports, all executions, all validations, all operations. It looked like that did succeed, which I'm a little surprised it did. I didn't override anything. But there's my all executions report, and if we zoom in a little, we can see that our two packages, child 1 that we just ran, and load customer, those executed and succeeded. Note that the IDs seem to be skipping here. These are execution IDs. They're also operation IDs. And the operation ID value controls these values. And it's interesting to keep in mind that all operations are not executions. In fact, if we go back and look at our all operations report, we can see the other operations. The first operation was a deploy the project framework test. The third was deploying the lift and shift. The executions happened at 2 and 4, and that's exactly what we see here. So the it can be a little confusing. to kind of get a feel for what's going on here. Again, we can look at the overview report. And what's nice about this is this particular project, the reason I wanted to execute this, is we have some other parameters that we're using here. We have a package parameter and we have a project parameter, and they're showing up here just with their default values. Now, you can do this however you'd like, but since the parameters for execution are in all caps and underscores, I typically create my parameter names so that they look different. So it's easy for me to glance and see, okay, what's a project parameter, a package parameter? What's the other stuff that's being parameterized here? And we're going to see in just a minute, there's some other stuff that we don't have control over that's going to show up in this list. We don't have any control over how it's cased and how it's written, but this is a very quick visual clue for me and a cue that draws my eyes to this, and that these are not the execution parameters. Those all caps are connection parameters. I said connection. Execution parameters. These are all execution parameters. We're going to get to connection parameters in just a minute. So that's a nice look at that overview report. Let's create some environments. So what we can do is we can right click on this project and we can create an environment. And I'm going to call this one ENV1 because I'm feeling really creative this morning. Where I am in the East, it's just before 6 a.m. In Eastern Daylight Time here. And not to worry, I'm usually up at this time of morning. We're looking at the Create Environment dialog. I'm going to click OK. That allows me to create it. I have to open this again. I have to right-click and go to Properties to get to the Environment Properties window, which allows me to configure it. So, pardon me, I'm going to create a couple of environment variables here. Actually, I'm going to create 4. I'm going to create one called Source Connection, and it's going to be a string, and it's going to be my source connection string. For the value for this, I'm going to go back to my project and just pick up the default value. Now, there's another way I can do this. Actually, I'll do it that other way. I'm going to right-click and go to Configure, and here's my connection manager. If I go to my source, I can hit this ellipse, and there's a nice, easy place for me to just copy the existing value out of there. I'm going to leave that open because we're going to come back to that. I'm going to paste this in. So I'm overriding it with the exact same value that's in there already. So you may be looking at this and going, Andy, you know, you're not helping. And you may be right, but I will help, I promise. Because this is a SQL login that I use, I don't have Active Directory configured in Azure at this time for this project. I'm going to need to create another string to hold my password. And because that password is secret and I don't want to share it with you on this video, I'm going to check this sensitive box, and then I'm going to type it in. And note that you now can't see my password. I'm going to do a similar thing for the target connection. I'm just pasting the original name on here. Go to string as my data type. You'll note I'm getting design time stuff because it's telling me, you know, the type field can't be empty. When I click on value, it stops. That goes away. It's nice to have that validation, I think. So my target connection string is really this guy right here. It doesn't need a password, so I'm good at this point. I could supply a password, but I don't need one. It's a local, and I'm using Windows Authentication to connect to that. So there's my 3 environment variables that I've created as part of this catalog environment. Click OK, and now I can use this configure window here to create what's called a reference. So a reference is really a connection between a project and a environment. It can also be between a package and an environment, but it's the key thing here is we are creating a reference from this SSIS project or package over to the environment, so that it's hooking those two together. Creating a relationship that's going to be maintained by a reference ID. So if we go back to parameters now and back to my connection managers, I can now do this. I can click on this connection string and set the parameter value. There are 3 sources for parameter values. There's the default value, the one that's selected by default when we open this up. This is here to, and this will travel wherever we deploy this IS pack file. This is a value we used when we built it. we can override this with a literal. And that's basically, we can just copy this entire connection string if we wanted to, and we could paste it in here. And rather than go to vdemo, which is the name of my machine, I could change this. And I'm going to, for the purposes of this demonstration, use this as a literal. Note, we could also use an environment variable, and that would be consuming the reference that we just configured. We'll do that in another configuration. But you can see that when we use that literal in configurations, that it puts that text in bold. That lets us know by text decoration that this value, this literal, is overriding the value that came from the SSIS package. We see others that are not decorated. That lets us know those are the default values. Again, for our source, we can configure the connection string, and we have the same options here. We could edit the value and create a literal override, or we can use this environment variable. And I'm going to use the environment variable. I'm going to pick the source connection. For that, note that the text decoration is underlined. That's indicating that we're pulling that value from the environment variable named source connection. It puts the name of the environment variable in the value, and it underlines it. Remember, we configured that password. Note that I don't have a default value from package for the password. Why is that? SSIS won't write down your password. It's very good about protecting that. So I can override it here, and if I were to type a password value into there, note that it's masked using the password character. I can also, because I've got a reference configured, I can use an environment variable, and I can pick that source connection password. So when I click OK here, now I've got those mappings done. Everything is ready to go, and it should work. If I click OK, it'll do the configuration. And now if I open this package again, right-click and click Execute, I've got another step that I need to do. Note that it's telling me the connection string of the Connection Manager source is configured to use an environment variable. If I click on that message, it pops up a message box. But it's telling me, but no environment variable has been selected. It says select the environment checkbox and specify the environment to use or specify a literal value. Now, I find that very interesting because it gives me these options. And I'll be honest, I didn't really pay attention to that last phrase until probably about a year and a half ago, that made me aware that you could override this using an execution literal. So we'll note, I'll just click OK here. If we go to the connection managers and we look at the source value and the stage value, note that, remember, the stage was our destination, and we configured a literal here, and it had that value local. We changed that. Why is it not showing up as a literal here? Why is it not in bold text? That's because at this stage, as far as this execution dialog is concerned, at this step in the process, that is no longer a literal value. That's the configured value. We have this ellipsis. We can click this ellipse and open up the edit literal value for execution. This is not set parameter value any longer. There are not three options down here for the value anymore. There's just the one option where I could change this, and I could change it back if I wanted. I could change it back to vdemo, and if I click OK with that, now the execution literal is configured here. That's why the text is bold at this point. Note that I can also choose an environment value. If I do choose an environment variable value, I've only got the one environment configured. And if I go back to my source, before I had these indicators telling me there was an error here, now I've got my connection strings that are created using my environment variable, the connection string with everything except the password, and then the connection's password. That's what's been configured into here. But note that the stage is being overridden by this execution literal. I could take this out. If I go in and were to delete this value, it wouldn't work at this point because I've already configured the literal value. But this is overriding even the mapping back to the target connection environment variable value. So very flexible, right? And note that it's giving me the message telling me everything is ready. Very extremely flexible here, the configurations that you have. I'm not going to go look at the overview report. Instead, I'm going to go into the all executions report, refresh that. We should see 3. And we do see 3 that ran and succeeded. That's good. But look at what happens at the parameters used here on the report. we see if we look at this that we still have our execution parameters, right? There's our 6 execution parameters. And we still have our package parameter and project parameters both still showing the defaults. We haven't done anything with those. But now we've got source connection string, source password, and stage connection string showing up. And note that the value used was for stage connection string was the value that we overrode at the execution time, the literal that we placed in here. Is the configuration value still in there? It is, but it does not store this execution override. It just runs with that value and then it throws it away. So what good is this? What's a use case for this? Well, let's say you've built version 1.1 of your data warehouse and it's time to start testing that. And you've got a QA environment, you've got your production environment, and you want to test your reference loaders. You've got a bunch of reference data, things like geographical data, zip codes, postal codes, states or provinces, stuff like that. You want to run that load from production into your QA environment to make sure that QA is up to date. That's a really important step, by the way. You need to make sure that QA matches production. And in another talk, I mentioned this, but it's worth emphasizing here that backing up and restoring the SSIS DB database, backing it up in production, restoring it on QA is not a valid way to migrate this data. You need to find another way to do it. I've got some thoughts on that, but not for this talk. And there's some very clever ways to do that. Other people have solved this problem in different ways, but some of the tools out at DILM Suite will help you with that. We see these connection strings, see source.connection string here, and notice the casing on that. I mimicked that casing in my parameter naming so that it distinguishes it from the execution parameters, logging level, dump on event, dump on error, etc. And it also kind of puts it in this group of project/package parameters. As far as the catalog is concerned, the properties of a connection manager are simply parameters. It doesn't treat them any differently. In fact, I mentioned earlier that the data inside of the SSIS DB database it's just a database. So if we pop over to SSIS DB really quick and we write a select statement, let's just select star from the catalog schema, which by the way serves as like a database programmer's interface. And if we use the parameters here, let's use execution parameter values. If we run those, there's the executions and the parameters that were set when we ran that. In fact, there's our execution ID 4 when we ran this just a minute ago. If we go down here, this is 5. This is one we just did, the execution we just ran. There's your connection manager properties, the connection string. Here's the source right here, source and stage. We'll just pop up here and then zoom in. There they are. There's project parameter. There's the synchronized. This is what that report's reading. And this is a view, catalog.execution parameter values, that stores basically the instance of the values at the time this package was executed. Why is this important? Because those values can change. They can be overridden at execution time, as we just saw. In fact, the stage connection string value was overridden. How's it configured? Well, it's configured to use local for the server, not vdemo, but we overrode that when we set it. These are the properties: connection string, initial catalog, retain same connection, server name, username, and note that they have the CM period in front of them. That indicates it's a connection manager. Do you see that CM in the report? Nope, they take that out. So, and that's okay. It's a good way to do it. They're all here together. All of the parameters that affected this execution are showing up right here. So if somebody accidentally, let's say rather than do that one-off execution I was describing earlier where I want to read from production and target QA with my reference data, if somebody, rather than setting the execution literal, actually goes and changes the configuration and forgets and leaves it that way, then it's constantly loading, to QA for your reference data. You can detect that. You can come look at the report here and see that did not load the production reference tables. It instead is still loading QA. That's why this flexibility exists. That's why it throws it away and forgets it. And in fact, we can test this by re-executing the load customer package. This time, we're just going to check the environment box. When we look at stage, we see that the connection string, did I not configure that? Oh, that's right, it's a literal. I'll just leave it as that. I did not configure that using my target connection. So when we click OK and go back to our all executions report and refresh, we go now look at the overview. We'll see that that value is set to local, which is what where our literal overriding configuration has it set. And let's see, if we pop back over here real quick and look at our configuration, we can see, I'm looking at the wrong one. Sorry. It's actually the same dialog, just I had the setting changed. But if we look at the source, there's our override. It's still there. There's our literal. We can change this now so that it consumes our environment variable. And what's nice about the environments is we can just manage all these values from this one spot. We want to change the environment value. We want to change the target. We just go to the environment. We don't even have to touch the packages or the configuration or anything. So if we look now, there's our source configuration that we've had all along. Now we have a target configuration. We click OK. We tell this no. And we go back to our report here and refresh. And we see, looking at the overview, that we're back to our vdemo value here. But the only reason we're there is because that's what's configured in our environment for the stage connection string. So this is a kind of an overview of using the SSIS catalog, using the catalog with environments. One thing that I will point out is that in order to view all of these, configurations, you have to look at the configure dialog here. You have to look at the environment properties there, and that's just a lot of clicking and opening and trying, to try and figure out the value of some of this stuff, right? You can see it. I'm doing here. I'm looking at these values, and okay, there's source connection string that's mapped into the connection string here. That's a lot of work. It's kind of busy, but one of the tools that I created for free that's available over at DILM Suite is called Catalog Browser, and it takes a minute to load because this is a beta version, and it is still being still in its test mode. But it'll load up here in just a minute, and it'll show us on a single tree all of the information that we see here. So here's our demo project, and we will see that if we look at project connections, for instance, I can see right away that the source is mapped to this. And what's nice about this, I call this feature values everywhere, is if I expand this out, I can see right down to the individual node. So I can tell connection string is mapped to source connection. Source connection comes from the reference to the catalog environment in the demo folder named env1, and this source connection environment variable value is shown right here. It's kind of handy to be able to see all that just right there in one window rather than looking at 2 or 3. So again, you can pick this up for free. It's not open source, but it is free. So there's that. And again, I mentioned another DILM Suite product, which is Catalog Reports, which allows us to, again, in reporting services, look at all of the execution information that we see. We can also view performance on this package. And since we've run it a few times, we have some performance metrics. Good reports. I love the reports. I just hate that they're trapped in SSMS. Sometimes there are people in the enterprise who have a legitimate need to know when the production data warehouse load is going to complete or how it's going. And if you want them to see these reports, you have to install SSMS on their machine and grant them permissions on production. And granted, in 2016, 2017's catalog, there's a role that's read-only. But prior to that, 2012 and 2014, you had to make them a member of the SSIS admin role, which means they could do things like accidentally delete the entire project out of the catalog in production. That's a no-no. So that's why I wrote catalog reports, so people outside of the of the role could be able to see this information. So that's really all I wanted to talk about today. We're just doing the local catalog. I mentioned that Azure Data Factory has an integration runtime, the SSIS integration runtime, which is SSIS in the cloud. And you can lift and shift your SSIS project right out to the cloud if you have that configured. Just a note about that, it's expensive. So if you're running on a free, free account, and I have a free account in Azure that I use. I accidentally left it running overnight after a webinar a few weeks ago, and it ate all of my almost all of my money. So it consumed about $30 worth of my dollars out there for free. So just be aware of that. And I blogged about this. I actually wrote it at andyleonard.blog about exactly how this happened and some notes on, shutting it down. I'm going to write some more about that. I'm just curating a bunch of automation that other people have put out there, writing it up my own way, building my own version of it. And I'll have that available just as soon as I possibly can. But that's really all that I wanted to cover in here. Be happy to take any questions that you have. I do want to mention before I get to my question slide that I'm going to be doing a full day class at the SQL Server Geeks Data Platform Summit 2018. You can learn more about that at dps10.com, as you see there. I want to be talking all day about SSIS and ADF. We're going to talk about performance and performance patterns and design patterns in SSIS and in Azure Data Factory. I know it's going to be in the middle of your night if you're in India, but in a few hours, I'm actually delivering a presentation on an ADF design pattern, which is using native Azure Data Factory. And I'll be sharing about the controller pattern, which is just simply a way to execute other pipelines in Azure Data Factory. It's a neat piece of functionality, but it's going to be in a few hours. It's a little less than 6 hours from now. So if you're up, you can pop over to andyleonard.blog. You'll see the note over there about the webinar. Sign up, and it'll be recorded. So if you want to go to sleep, go ahead. It's all good. One of the side effects of getting up this early is I do go to sleep rather early. So thank you so much for attending and for your attention. Thank you to Manohar and everyone at Data Platform, Satya, Data Platform Geeks. I appreciate SQL Server Geeks and Data Platform folks. It's an honor to both present at the presentation and also to at the Data Platform Geeks conference, and also to present here. We have one question. A script task is losing code when I migrate SSIS packages from SSIS 2008 R2 to 2016. How to resolve this one? I'm not sure exactly what you're encountering there. I do note that there are some issues with script tasks losing code. I have communicated, my experience to the team in Shanghai. That's where the SSIS team is located these days. I've let them know that I've seen some funny behavior with SSIS script tasks losing code, especially if they're in containers. And not really sure what's going on there. I haven't seen it lose when I do an update from 2008 R2 to 2016 or 2017. So I don't know exactly what you're experiencing there. I'm really sorry about that one. But I do appreciate the question. Any other questions? Feel free. So I see what are errors that will occur when we deploy the package. Oh, that's a great question. So you can see errors in the deployment if you do things like restore an SSIS DB database to another instance of SQL Server. If you just use the backup and restore functionality in in SQL Server, it'll work. It'll actually deploy that. It'll deploy that database. Restore that database. But then when you try to deploy, you'll get a squirrely error about failed to deploy. I blogged about that as well, and I also include in that blog at the bottom a script that I changed it a little bit. I pulled something down from MSDN on all of the steps that are required to really restore that SSIS DB database. There are about a dozen steps to that. It's not simply a right click and restore or restore database. Although that will succeed, that operation will succeed, that database can be useless if you've moved it to a different instance. You also have to remember that password. Remember the password when we created the catalog? If you don't have that password, you have to come up with a different way to migrate that. So Rohit says, what is the toughest challenge you faced in SSIS till now? That's a really good question, Rohit. Learning SSIS was the toughest challenge. And I did this back in late 2005 when it was in beta. We had some versions of it. I worked on one of the first SSIS books from Rocks Press. And it was 10 of us authored that book, and they've got pictures of us on the cover there. Brian Knight was our lead author, and I worked with a team of really smart people there. And if I had not signed a contract and given my word that I was going to write that, 2 chapters in that book, I would have quit a dozen times in that process. SSIS was just really hard to learn. It's a little easier now because we've got years of blog posts out there and stuff like that. But I'd say learning it was really the hardest thing. I've done some interesting near real-time work recently where I've been working with things like the stock market in the U.S., where you're trying to populate things and you're trying to keep it up to the second. And literally you're creating rows per second for every stock. That was an interesting challenge as well. I get a lot of people tell me things like tell me things like that. You can't do that with SSIS. Well, you can. So interesting stuff. So that's those are great questions. I'm hoping that those were good answers. Again, if you'd like to catch up with me, there's some feedback, andy.leonard@entdna.com. You can email me, follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn, or Enterprise Data and Analytics is also available on Twitter. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andy. And we have just got one more question, but before you take that, I'll just quickly share some information about the PreCons. All right, so we have got 12 PreCons at the Data Platform Summit this year. As Andy was telling his experience, and you can see his expertise and the experience and exposure that he has been working from the introduction or creation of SSIS. You get to interact with these kind of speakers at the conference. You see the value that you get, and there is always a starting point, as Andy was mentioning about how he had to write the books before he quit because there was a contract. So give that commitment, take that commitment, and attend this conference. And this is where this could be your starting point. This could be a place where it will be a game changer for you. So please take some time out of your busy schedule and attend this conference and try and meet these people from where we get inspiration from, right? So we have 12 different PreCons to choose from. And we have Troubleshoot and Optimize for SQL Server Like a Pro by Dimitri. We have Sunil Agarwal, who is coming back again this year, and he's doing a full day training on how to migrate your databases to Azure SQL DB as well as managed instance. And Reza Rad, a BI expert from New Zealand and an MVP, he'll be doing a Power BI from Rookie to Rockstar. Dr. Leila Atati, who is a data scientist and AI MVP from New Zealand, she'll be doing 2 PreCons back to back. The first day will be leading edge data science with Microsoft tools. As you know, Andy Leonard, he'll be doing a full day of intelligent data integration with integration services as well as Azure Data Factory. Cosmos DB and the Madan Gajendran and his team actually will be there, not just Madan, but there are 4 more speakers who will be joining Madan to do a full day workshop on Cosmos DB. The second PreCon walk by Dr. Leila Atati is building intelligence applications using the Microsoft AI platform. Steph Locke, if you're really serious about R, this is the session for you. It's practical R for everyone. Sanjay Mishra, again, the Azure CAT team. will be there. It's not just Sanjay, but there will be his team also who will be doing a full day training on how to build a scalable data architecture in Azure. We have Joey and Denny coming back again. So Joey will be doing a full day training on Linux for the SQL Server DBAs. Peter Myers, who has been a very popular speaker last year, he'll be doing 0 to analysis services, and Denny will be doing high availability and disaster recovery, both SQL Server on-premise and Azure. If you need more information, there's a lot of information available on dps10.com about the conference, and also a lot of information on DataPlatformGeeks.com. You can write to us directly at contact@dps10.com. If you need any help to talk to your manager or your L&D department to help you attend the conference, we will be able to provide some information and also talk to them. So there are the direct numbers that you can reach us on. And I'll again hand it back to Andy to answer those couple of questions in Q&A.
Thank you so much, sir. So Rohit asked, what are best practices to improve package performance in SSIS, and basically which transformations should we avoid? I'm really going to dive into that deeply during the PreCon. I believe I'm presenting faster SSIS there as well. That, I try to avoid sort transformations. I try to do my sorting using the database. And I try to also avoid the OLADB command in the data flow. Those are two that I try to watch out for and work around. They're there for a reason. There's actually use cases for both of those, but I think there's usually a better way, and certainly we'll go through that better way when we talk there in about 6 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks. And I've got another question. Can you please share with us a few worst practices in SSIS you have seen in your experience? Gosh, not only have I seen them, I've also written a few earlier in my career. Doing anything to interrupt the flow of the data flow. It's a very asynchronous operation. It's picking up buckets of data, if you will. And anything that you do to interrupt that, that's the reason why I recommend against the sort transformation. Let's say you're loading 1 million rows, 10,000 rows at a time, and you're pumping it into a sort. Well, which buffer has the first row? The sort doesn't know, so it has to load and maybe even queue to disk all of those buffers before it can figure out which one is the first row and then start feeding stuff out of there. So it becomes what we call a blocking transformation. I've used those. Everything that I've written on and recommend against, I first built and had to learn just like everyone else. So I'm hoping that you will learn from my mistakes and not make them, not repeat my mistakes. That's one of the reasons why I share that. Probably from the one other thing I would mention is, and again, this is another that I did, I saw people building very large, very busy SSIS packages, several data flows. And I recommend against that nowadays. I recommend building very small SSIS packages with the minimum number of data flows possible, optimally 1 data flow. And I call those big packages with lots of data flows in them a monolith. The reason I like using the small unit of works is SSIS is software development. And I treat the individual packages as if they are functions, if you will. So that's a best practice. Now, once you create a bunch of packages, now you need a way to execute those. That's what the controller pattern is really all about. And that's something I'm going to be talking about in ADF in a few hours, but also that I'll cover when we do the webinar. Sorry, the full day pre-con for the conference. For Rohit asks about share any resources available online for starters. Yep. I wrote a 21-part series at SQL Server Central, and you go to SQLServerCentral.com. On the left, there's stairways, and if you scroll down, there is a stairway to integration services, and that's actually a good introduction. It'll take you from just getting started, assuming you know nothing about SSIS, to being what I consider to be a solid intermediate level developer in SSIS. So that's a good resource. There's a lot of resources available, online. I'm I'm hesitant because I don't know if the SQL Server Geeks have any SSIS resources available. Do you?
We do, but they are mostly like individual blogs. It's not like a stairway or learning path. But
Gotcha.
if you're like face any problems or something, and if you search for things, you'll find very good blogs on SSIS, on on SQL Server Geeks.
Very cool. I suspected as much. Sorry I didn't know the answer to that right away. But I think that's our last question for now. Again, it was a big honor for me to be here this morning, Eastern time. The sun's about to come up here in Virginia. I appreciate y'all spending some time with me today. Huge honor, Satya and Manohar, for me to be here. And I'm looking so forward to my very first trip to India. And in a few weeks, I will see you there.
Thanks, Andy. It was really great to host you. As always, you have been a very great support for the community. And thanks for taking out your time and waking up this early in the morning to give a session for the DataPlatformGeeks.
Most welcome, sir. You are most welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andy.
Thank you.
And thanks all attendees for taking out your time. Have a great day.